City Hall is open to the public with reduced capacity and physical distancing requirements. Meetings can be viewed via live stream on YouTube and through the city website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or phone 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact cpsc@london.ca. Colleagues, first I am going to look to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I'm going to look for committee's consent to change the order of operations here a little bit. Item 3, the scheduled items, we have one item, 3.1, which is an item not to be heard before 4:05, public participation meeting on the administrative monetary penalties application to municipal bylaws. We don't currently have any speakers registered for the PPM. Now, individuals may still show up in the next couple of minutes, but in order to allow our staff in the committee rooms to be released, I'd like to deal with that item first, and then we will move on to the consent agenda. There are 8 items on the consent agenda. Item 2.1 has been pulled, and item 2.4 has been pulled. Item 2.1 is going to require us most likely to go in camera, and when the in-camera session begins, the YouTube stream will stop and it does not resume when we come back from in-camera. So unless I see any objections from colleagues, we will deal with 2.1 at the end of the consent agenda. We will deal with all of the other items first, and that way we minimize the loss of YouTube stream for the public. So I'll just look to see if there's any questions or concerns about that order of operation, and I'm not seeing any indications that there are. So we've got about a minute and a half before we can move officially to the public participation meeting. So I'll just ask colleagues' indulgence there while we get to 4:05. Okay, the clock now reads 4:05, so I will look for a motion to open the public participation meeting for item 3.1, moved by Councillor Hillier, seconded by the Mayor. And we will call the question. Okay, the clerks have that ready for us now, so I will do the roll call. Councillor Van Holst?
Yes.
Councillor Salee?
Yes.
Councillor Squire?
Yes.
Councillor Hillier?
Yes.
Mayor Holder?
Yes.
And I am also a yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you, colleagues. I don't see anyone currently waiting in committee room 1 or committee room 5. I'll just look to staff to see if there's anyone there currently. And while we're waiting for a response there, we will see if council has any questions for our staff on this item. Councillor Van Holst?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I did have a number of questions on the administrative monetary penalties. However, I had those answered offline with staff, and so I'm just going to offer a thank you for that.
Great, that was nice and succinct. Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. And I had some conversations with staff about this too, so I'll echo your thanks there. I'm not seeing anyone coming to either mic in either committee room, so I will look for a motion to close public participation. Moved by Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. And we'll give this just a moment and then we'll call the roll. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I am also a yes.
Garrett.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so we just have to dispense with item 3.1 now, so the clerk does have a motion for us to close up this item and that the items in the report be accepted as proposed. So we'll give you just a moment to get that ready. And that is on the screen. Yeah. And Mr. Katolik is with us as well. There were just a couple of small amendments to what was in everyone's report, a couple of just numbering issues. So I'll ask Mr. Katolik if he can just update us on what was changed from the report to today.
Yes, through the chair, there's a number of technical numbering issues with regard to reference to the idling bylaw and the AMPS bylaw, strictly numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik. And Councillor Squire.
I'll move that motion.
Okay, that's been moved by Councillor Squire. For the committee members who are remote, I just want to make sure that you've had a chance to see the motion. Seeing thumbs up from Councillor Hillier. Okay, so I'll look for
Mr. Chair, was that being sent to us by email?
Would you like me to have the clerk read it out?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Development and Compliance and Chief Building Official, the revised attached proposed bylaw amendments be introduced at the Municipal Council meeting to be held on October 13th, 2020, for the purpose of applying the Administrative Monetary Penalties System bylaw to municipal bylaws.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think it would be great for the public if...
Sorry, Councillor, just before you continue, are you willing to second this? Because we do need to get a seconder on this.
Oh. All right.
Okay, so Councillor Van Holst seconding, and now for your comments.
Thank you. So perhaps we could have staff just describe how things are going to be different with the administrative monetary penalties in place, as opposed to what might have happened should somebody have gotten a fine before.
Mr.
Yes, through
Katolik.
the chair, there's a couple things that would be different in terms of service of the penalty. Penalties can now be served via mail, fax, and email. The other main change is challenging a penalty. Currently, under the Provincial Offences Act, challenging a Part 1 ticket or notice is through the court system. challenging an administrative penalty system is a two-stage challenge. Firstly, you go to a screenings officer who has the ability to reduce the penalty or cancel the penalty. And if the person who receives the penalty does not agree with the decision of the screenings officer, they could then apply for a hearing, and the hearings officer has the same accountability in terms of the bylaw, in terms of reducing the fine, keeping the fine as is, or canceling the fine. It is a much streamlined system than the current provincial offenses system for bylaw issues.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik. Councillor Van Holst?
Yes, thank you. That was very clear. Perhaps staff could tell us about the time that that residents have to respond to a potential fine. So is that the same amount of time as they would have had before? Is it a longer time or a shorter time?
Mr. Katolik?
Through the chair, I don't have an answer for this. I'd have to look into it to give accurate advice.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to insert a slight probe on that, Mr. Katolik. Would it be true that the times can be different depending on the offense?
Actually, I do have an answer now. It would be 15 days.
Great, thank you. Seeing no other questions, we have a mover and a seconder, so we will call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I am also a yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, colleagues, with that concludes our scheduled item. We will move now to the consent agenda. Items 2.1 and 2.4 have been pulled. I'll just look to see if colleagues wish anything else pulled to deal with separately. Seeing none, I will look for someone to move 2.2 through 2.8, exclusive of 2.4, so that we can deal with those. Moved by Mayor Holder, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Any discussion on any of these items? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. I had a few questions about some of the items. One, looking at item 2.2 on page 7, it suggests that part of the additional crews, additional staff required, we're going to be outreach workers, bylaw officers, and roads crew members. And I'm wondering why we need a roads crew member for the home for this item.
Not sure which staff member wants to field that one. Look to see if maybe Mr. Dickens has a response for you, Councillor.
Yes, thank you through the chair. The roads crew actually plays a very vital role in the coordinated informed response and the support that we provide to the community. Often we will be called out to do cleanup of an encampment that has been abandoned or to respond to any debris or items that are left behind from those that have been sleeping rough. The roads crew plays a very critical role in ensuring that we're able to safely transport belongings that are of the possession of certain individuals, or to safely assist in the cleanup left behind from some of the encampments. It is a very busy role as part of the CIR, and probably just as important as much as the outreach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And
Yes, Councillor.
yes, if I may, the Canada Housing Benefit, along with the community housing bridging program, Looks like that's about $1 million in grants. Is that all from the province? So is that, I think that's money coming from outside of London for those programs. Is that correct?
Mr. Dickens?
Through the chair, that is correct. The Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit is a joint funding partnership between the federal and provincial levels of government. And as of yesterday, London has actually issued 230 Canada-Ontario housing benefits, or we've started the process on 230, to the point where we're actually working with other municipalities who may have underspent their COB, their Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit, to see if we could actually get access to their unspent money as well. We've had very positive uptake in our community. Full credit to our housing services team.
Okay, thank you for that. I did read in here that there was an RFP for the modular housing going to happen. Can you give us a sense when that will take place?
Mr. Dickens?
Thank you, through the chair. So yes, we're continuing to work through on the modular housing front. The one thing I'm very proud to say is that we have a very dedicated enterprise-wide approach to affordable housing, and specifically to the urgency of modular housing. From our planning and development folks, Realty, certainly our partners at HDC. HDC has been advancing a lot of the pre-consultation work with our planning partners, as well as meeting with potential manufacturers. The expectation is that we will be closing out an RFP through the Housing Development Corp before the end of the year. We expect construction to begin in 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Dickens. Councillor Van Holst, before I go to anyone else, did you have any follow-ups to that? I see your lips moving, but your mic is muted.
Okay, I had a couple other questions, perhaps for some other items, but if there's a councillor who wanted to ask about the housing quarterly report, I'm happy to pass the mic over.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I will put you back on the speakers list at the end, and we will go to Councillor Squire for his comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment on the housing quarterly report and the value of it. I think what I really like about this report is it's moved away from a system before where at least I felt like we were getting different reports on different areas of housing in the city separately, and it was hard to put them all together. And what this report, in fact, is doing is putting all of these different elements of housing together, so it's easy for councillors and constituents to refer to it and see exactly what we're doing in different areas. And there's huge value in that, in addition to obviously saving on the number of people who have to show up and give reports, but it's a huge value. And as we move forward to some of these boards operating separately, again, whether it's London Middlesex Community Housing or the Housing Development Corporation, this may be an approach that is still of huge value, which is incorporating reports from different housing areas together. So that's just something that I certainly prefer in terms of the approach, and it's very much appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. Mayor Holder, I have you next on the list.
Thanks very much, Chair. I didn't know if I was going to call this on a point of order. It's probably a broader comment, and that is that, again, I'm going to come back to something that I was less successful in at a recent meeting, that when we're going to discuss to the length we are issues that are on a consent agenda, then it's not a consent agenda because we want to speak to them. So at some point, I'm going to ask the clerk for clarification on this, not today, just so that we can, and because I never want to limit any discussion from council on any issue. I think that's healthy and appropriate. But I just am confused by what I find in my experience as a consent agenda, which means that we have no discussion. We're going to approve those, and anything that deserves discussion should be taken from that agenda. But I won't call that as a point of order. I'm just bringing it up as an observation. Nothing more to add. Thanks.
So noted, Your Worship, and I will say that after the last SPPC meeting, I decided that it might be best to proceed as our standard practice until we get some clarity around that, but appreciate the comment there. I don't have any other hands raised, although I do have Deputy Mayor Helmer, I'll go to you. I have a quick comment for staff on the housing report as well, and then we'll come back to Councillor Van Holst. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. On item 2.2, I wonder if through the chair, housing staff want to comment about the availability of units in the private market for people to move into, even with the housing benefits. I understand that it's a pretty tight market right now, and I wonder in terms of how many landlords are participating, if there's anything in particular that landlords could be doing to help ease the housing crunch and the homelessness issue in our community.
Mr. Dickens.
Thank you through the chair. That's a very good question. In fact, that is one of the most pressing challenges we continue to face in the community is gaining access to affordable housing stock or to market rent stock. We do try to work through as many of our housing subsidies and supplements as we possibly can to make market rent affordable. We have been working cross-corporately on this front as well, working with all of our partners. And it is a challenge that we keep bringing back to our housing table in terms of gaining access to some of those more expensive or market rents. I might pass it over to Mr. Cooper, who's on the call today, who can speak to some of the success we're starting to have on the head leasing program and some of the homeless prevention allowances that his team has been so diligently getting out the door.
Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, and through the chair, I would agree with what Kevin is saying, that it is a challenge out in current community, not only from an availability perspective, but from a connection perspective. With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is harder to see places. It is harder to arrange setups and leases for individuals, given some of the various challenges that we're seeing with the restrictions on the pandemic. But I will can share with council or with committee today that we are actively moving on our head lease program. We've had an individual landowner come forward, and we're working with Realty Service and some other departments to get that head lease in play for later October into early November, where we will be bringing an update back to committee and council for your reference. So we are seeing some successes there. We are getting some connections with landlords, but it is slow. It is definitely not keeping up with the demand. But the programs that we have in place with the Canada Ontario Housing Benefit, with our housing supplements, we are able to bridge that gap better between what somebody can pay and what the market rent is. We're just, it's the functional number of units that can be problematic.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Deputy Mayor Helmer, did you have any follow-up to that? I'm not seeing the deputy mayor with us at the moment, so I will, oh, in fact, he has just messaged me that he's lost the Zoom, so he is trying to reconnect. I will just offer a very quick comment to staff, particularly with the London Middlesex housing portion of the quarterly report. I'm really heartened to see that work is continuing on the vacancy process, and while the vacancy rate at 3.7 might not seem to be where we would like it, with 2.1% of those 3.7 vacancies being in active restoration, I'm glad to hear that our units are being repaired and getting ready to get back into circulation for rental stock, with 1.3% of our units now in active rental stock and 0.3% already with a lease in place where the lease is signed and we're just waiting for the move-in date before they can be declared not vacant. That's some good news. And with, seeing that the vacancy rate is improving by leasing over 100 units from June to August, that's making an impact as well. So I just want to highlight and congratulate staff for the work that they're doing with London Middlesex Community Housing. And we're waiting for the deputy mayor to come back. I'll see if anyone else has any further comments. Michael, or sorry, Councillor Van Holst.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about 2.6 and 2.8, and I will mention thanks to the mayor, for his comments earlier about consent agendas. I did supply a list of all the things that I wanted to either question or comment on, and then the chair could make his own decision on how we deal with that. But for 2.6, it's saying we want to dissolve the trust, and because it was never established. And so I wanted to ask why that was the case. It seemed to be part of some previous direction, and but the trust was never enacted, and perhaps I could get some clarification about that.
We'll look to see if we've got a staff member who's able to speak to that. I believe Councillor Pelosa is with us at the meeting too, and I don't know if she might be able to comment. I know she's our representative on the museum board.
Hi, it's Bridget Summers speaking. Through the chair, Museum London approached the city clerk's office to ask for the acknowledgement to be signed, and the acknowledgement states that that the City of London, the Museum London Foundation, and the Museum London never actually transferred any funds from the operating endowment fund to the trust, which was set up in 2019 to ensure that the transferred funds were allocated in a correct manner. So the city clerk's office is involved just in terms of the acknowledgement. We don't have any further information as to the foundation in its dissolving practices at this moment.
Thank you, Ms. Summers.
Okay, well, Mr. Chair, I guess I'll support this for now, but perhaps I can look into it further between now and council. It just that there still seems to be some questions in my mind for that. But let me move on to 2.8. So we've received a communication about some difficulties with respect to illicit cannabis grow operations, and there was an ask there for the issues to be raised at the FCM and the OMA and Roma. But I wanted to ask our staff if they'd look through that and believe that London is suffering from some of these troubles. Are we experiencing some of the challenges that were expressed in this letter, seeing that it...
With respect, Councillor Van Holst, 2.8 is in regard to the authorized retail stores, not grow operations. So I just wonder if perhaps we can leave that until item 4.1.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I didn't mix those up. Thank you. My mistake. So I'll ask the same question when we get to 4.1.
Okay. In the meanwhile, the Deputy Mayor has been able to reconnect through Zoom. So Deputy Mayor Helmer, I just wanted to see if you had any follow-up on your line of questions around the housing report.
I caught the first part of the answer. I will have to stay in suspense for the second part. I won't make everyone hear it again.
Well, the great news is it was captured on the YouTube stream, so you can always view it later. Okay, looking to see if there's any further comment on the consent items that have been moved and seconded. And I don't see anyone else's hand up to speak to those. Oh, Councillor Van Holst?
Yes, sorry, and Mr. Chair, I actually just did mix up my questions on the 2.8. It said in here that the ward councillors would be contacted with respect to these applications, and I don't recall that happening. but I'm wondering if it has to do with the column that says, well, it's open to the public and in progress. And I'm just wondering, when would a ward councillor be contacted about such an issue?
Well, Councillor, I was certainly contacted about an application that went in for my ward, but we'll look to see if Mr. Sultan might be able to give us some comment on that.
Yep, through the chair. So some of the applications on the list, they may just be an initial stage, and the city hasn't been notified of it being open for public comment. I can confirm that 423 Hamilton Road, I believe we just sent it out as of Monday. And I believe Councillor Van Holst, you may have been CC'd in that notification. I can verify that for you. But yeah, typically we contact the ward councillor, provide them with what the submission to the AGCO was. I know I've emailed a number of ward councillors with the submissions that we have sent to the AGCO so far.
Okay, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I read my report on the weekend or late last week, and now I noticed that yes, in fact, that yesterday I did receive the email. So that's I'll appreciate staff for keeping their promises. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any other hands up, so I am going to call to question on the consent items that have been moved and seconded. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I am also a yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you, colleagues. We will now deal with item 2.4, which Councillor Squire asked to be pulled. So I will look to him for some starting comments on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'd just like to ask a question. I remember when this report was requested by the committee, and I in looking at the terms of reference for that, I'm disappointed that we framed it the way we did, because I thought we were going to get something perhaps a little broader. But maybe I can start by asking you a question. I'm looking at the grants that are mentioned for the arts in London, and I just wonder about our community grants program. Is that also available to arts programs? Can they apply in the normal course as other community organizations do for grants, or does the availability of this money through the Community Arts Investment Program take away that ability?
Ms. Smith.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, any not-for-profit incorporated organization can apply to the London Community Grants Program, including arts organizations, and we actually fund many of them. And we also fund some if they aren't incorporated, as long as they have a host agency, because many of the arts groups are grassroots. So as long as they have a host agency, for example, we fund one through Museum London as the host agency, they can also apply for funding.
Great. Councillor Squire?
My follow-up is, are any of these grants set up so that if you receive one, you can't apply for another? For instance, if you receive something out of the Community Arts Investment Program, does that affect your ability to apply under anything else? Is there anything like that in any of these programs?
Through the chair, we work closely with our colleagues in Parks and Recreation, so we make sure we don't fund the same program. So we could fund the same organization, but it must be for two totally separate programs or outcomes. So we do not fund the same initiative through the same funding at the City of London.
All right, but an organization, just to follow up so I'm clear, but an organization, for instance, an art gallery or something like that could make an application for a community grant and also make an application through the Community Arts Investment Program. And as long as they are not the identical thing, they can receive funding from both sources.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Just a couple of comments on this. I suppose it struck me, and one of the reasons I viewed this as a sort of a starting point is we don't, in a city of 400,000 people, when I look at money available exclusively for the arts, we really don't fund the arts to a great extent. You know, we fund, if you take out the Grand Theater, which receives $500,000, and the heritage part of it, you're really looking at less than $1 million that we're specifically saying is available to the arts in the City of London, and that isn't a lot. So I just wonder what the follow-up is going to be, because what I hear all the time from the arts community is that it's very hard to make a go of it in London, given the amount of money that's available to them. I'm not saying that's anyone's fault, but I just wonder what the next step of this process is, or if there is a next step.
Ms. Smith, did you want to offer any thoughts on that? Or, oh, I see Mr. McGonigal is with us.
So thank you. Through the chair, what I would say to that is that the Arts Council agreement and the $750,000 that you see in the report is the commitment of the City of London through that program anyway, with the Arts Council and CAPE through to 2023. Their purchase of service agreement was aligned with the multi-year budget process. Of course, our hopes is that there may be opportunities to try and increase that amount, and there's some community discussions right now happening with many of those organizations that were mentioned about post-COVID recovery and what that looks like. So I think there'll be lots more on this item to come, but in terms of that $750 for CAPE, that is the amount that is allotted through the agreement that the city currently has with the Arts Council until 2023.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You sort of faded out there, Mr. Sconigal, but I take your point. I just think it's important for us to remember that in a city of London where there's all kinds of things going on and all kinds of facilities involved in the arts, it's part of a vibrant community, and I think it would be well served for staff and to talk to us in the future and talk to the arts community about where we're going with this, because I think the Arts Council, quite frankly, takes on a pretty heavy load in terms of taking that money, adjudicating, and of course, once they adjudicate it, some people are happy and some people are unhappy, but I'm just really interested in moving into the future, and I know staff will do this, and how do we deliver money to the arts, and what's the best way to do it? And of course, the private sector has a responsibility too. So I look forward to the future on this, and I thank you for this report.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. I have Councillor Van Holst and then Mayor Holder on the list. Sorry, Mayor, I just demoted you there for a brief second. Councillor Van Holst, you'll have to unmute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some great questions from my colleague, Councillor Squire. I know one thing we can certainly do is help them fund their industries. I'm speaking about a film industry. When that comes back, I hope we can see some support there. But specifically for this group, there's, I think, one idea that might have been missed, or at least I have a suggestion I didn't see on here, is that Budweiser Gardens has free days. If somebody ever wanted to put together a huge art show, it could make use of one of those free days. And of course, we also could advertise that on the billboards that we have, because there's still free digital advertising on billboards for arts events. So that's a little combination of things that could make for a pretty great visual art show. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Holder.
Just a statement, Chair. If we come back to the intent of this report, we were responding to specifically an artist who had specific questions about arts and culture policies and funding, and that's what you see addressed here. I think it's incumbent on council, if we feel that that the funding is not sufficient, that we have a budget process to deal with that. I don't think it's incumbent on staff to say this is what we're going to do here and there. And there seemed to be almost an implied thought that we have that's their job. That's our job. And at some point, if we feel that's appropriate, then we've got a process to deal with that. And I'd look forward to any of that discussion around supporting the arts. And I think the comments are reasonable, but I think it falls back to council and no one else. So thanks to staff for the comprehensive report that they've given. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. Councillor Squire.
Yeah, I think the mayor's right, and I think we have a lot to do as a council. All I took was that Mr. McGonigal offered to have ongoing presentations and discussions on that, and I would appreciate that. And I know the Arts Council is also interested in doing this, so I think with a cooperative effort that I'm certainly committed to in speaking to the people involved, I think we can get there. But the mayor's quite right; it's not on staff to come forward and deal with this. I think the report helps us get started, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. I see no other hands up, so it being noted that on this day, Councillor Squire agreed with Mayor Holder. We will call to question on this item. We just need a mover and a seconder to advance this. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hillier. We'll give it just a moment.
Councillor Squire is thoughtful as always, Chair.
Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I am also a yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. Colleagues, before we move to 2.1 on the consent agenda, as I noted at the beginning of the meeting, that will end our YouTube live stream. So I want to see if there's a willingness to deal with items for direction 4.1 and the deferred matters list so that we can have the public see those, and then we can move into 2.1. And if that takes us in camera, that will end the YouTube stream. So unless there's any objections, we will move to item 4.1, the items for direction. This is the communication received, stop illicit cannabis grow operations. And I'll look to see if we have a motion with regard to this or questions or comments. Councillor Hillier, and then Councillor Hillier, you're moving receipt. Okay. Do we have a seconder to move receipt of this? Councillor Van Holst. Okay, and questions and comments. And I know Councillor Van Holst, you had a question around this. You're on mute, Councillor.
Wow, I'm doing really well starting on mute today. So, Mr. Chair, this was a communication coming from outside of London, and I wanted to ask our staff how, to what extent London is suffering from the problems described in the letter.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not sure whether this would go to Mr. Sultan or Mr. Katolik, but we'll look to staff for an answer on that.
Through the chair, we do have some issues within the City of London with respect to odor of cannabis growing operations. And in that regard, we are always in discussions with the federal ministries of health and the ministry that approves mainly medical marijuana as opposed to the commercial growing establishments. We had a discussion a few weeks ago, and I do know that Councillor Morgan is very much involved with FCM in that regard. So the main issue is with odor of the medical grows.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik. Councillor Van Holst, anything further?
No, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions on this, we will, Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much, Chair. I was not going to comment, but I think just a little response, if I can, to Mr. Katolik's comments, because to me, I'm ignoring the issue of illicit. If it's illicit and illegal, we will deal with that as it is. I think, though, as he's brought up the issue of the odor, what I'm trying to do is get from Mr. Katolik, through you, please, a sense of where the buck stops. I've certainly had discussions, as I know Councillor Morgan has, with our federal members, specifically Kate Young, because of an operation that is in Councillor Morgan's ward. And I thought it was pretty clear from what the federal member said to me, was that it was not their jurisdiction. And it seems to be that it's bouncing back and forth. At what stage, though, this would help me, and perhaps if I could ask Mr. Katolik, at what point do we get involved in these odor issues? Because it can be significant at different points in time. So where do we intervene and or become involved, Mr. Katolik? I'd like to understand in terms of jurisdictional responsibility. And again, I say that because I think the federal government's certainly been clear to me they don't believe it's their jurisdiction. Can you just help me understand that a bit better, please?
Mr. Katolik?
Yes, through the chair. Our last discussion with the federal government, they indicated they are doing a 5-year review of the regulations and legislation around medical marijuana grow licenses. The issue comes down to that there are very good safeguards in place currently for commercial recreational grow operations with respect to odor. The same is not in fact for the medical grow licenses. And in fact, individuals can actually grow for others and have up to 4 licensees that they're responsible for growing this. So we continue to get complaints regarding odors, and these are 100% focused on the medical grows. And in our discussions with the federal government, I believe that is under their responsibility and their jurisdiction, that if they applied the same regulations to medical grows as they do to recreational grows, those odor issues would cease.
So through you, Chair. Thank you. So does that, it feels a bit, you're being more specific, which I really, really appreciate your clarity on this. How do we take this forward in a way to and perhaps with the correspondence already gone back and forth, so that it's not a ping pong ball? How do you think we need to be able to fix this ultimately? I know what you think the solution needs to be, but how do we get them to sit down and have that discussion? What's your view on it?
Mr. Katolik.
Through the chair, this isn't just an issue in London. And speaking with our counterparts, when we used to go to conferences in the past, this is an issue across the country, and it's regarding the medical marijuana grows. There have been some court decisions with respect to access to medical marijuana, and based on those decisions, there's a lot of regulations that have not been implemented, similar to the commercial grow operations. In our opinion, in terms of civic administration, the best is to work through FCM. We are very happy to hear that they are doing a 5-year review of the regulations. So perhaps either a resolution from council or a letter from the mayor's office indicating that city council would support regulations similar to commercial grow operations to larger medical grow operations in reference to public nuisances, including odor.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik. Thank you, Chair. I think that's important, and I'm certainly happy to work with you and with council to construct something that may make some sense and move this along. And the notion of working through FCM, I think, is helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. And I will just briefly add to your comment there. I know that Councillor Morgan is actually on the FCM committee that's dealing with this issue, so some further discussion with him might be helpful there. Seeing no one else's hand raised. Oh, Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the ask in the communication was, of course, for us to approach the FCM and the AMO, and it seems like we're discussing that a little bit. I'm not sure the best way to go forward with that. Maybe perhaps the mayor and Councillor Morgan could have a discussion first. Perhaps include Councillor Hopkins for the AMO as well. But I have a question through you to staff, just regarding the relative sizes of the commercial versus the medical grow operations. Are they similar things, or are those very different things?
Through the chair, the commercial grow operations are rather large in size. They're largely located in industrial areas and thousands of plants, and very sophisticated and high-tech odor reduction and HVAC systems. Some of the medical grow operations are in people's garages, basements of homes, and in industrial areas in London, and they are smaller in size. They do approach just over 1,000 plants at times, but mainly it's in the hundreds of plants.
Okay, and do we think it's reasonable to expect that they could implement the same kinds of mitigations in terms of HVAC into those operations?
Mr. Katolik.
Through the chair, I think not being an expert in HVAC, but we do have experts on staff. And we think it's reasonable that there be some form of HVAC mitigation systems to address odor. But at the same time, the other issue is looking at land use. Do we want people growing medical marijuana in their garages, in their basements, in terms of hundreds of plants or more than 4? So odor is the #1 issue, and that's the complaint that's coming into the city from surrounding residential uses.
Okay, well, thank you. That brings us back to the mayor's comment then about jurisdiction. Who's deciding right now that those medical grow ops can have hundreds of plants versus 4?
Through the chair, that's a decision made by the federal government, and that's based on the prescription provided by the medical physician to the patient. The city is not notified of those locations. We are, however, notified of commercial grow operations.
Okay, so thank you. So that seems to me then that's fairly clearly a federal regulation that would have to be imposed, because it's not something that we deal with directly.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other speakers, we will call the question. We'll give the clerks just a moment to bring this up. And Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I'm a yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So colleagues, we will move to deferred matters before we deal with 2.1. So we'll look for a mover and a seconder on the deferred matters list. I do want to note for colleagues that as a result of votes today, if they're upheld by council, we'll actually remove 3 items from our deferred matters list today. So that's a bit of good news, but I'll look for a mover. Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Any further discussion? Councillor Van Holst? You're on mute, Councillor.
I was pleased that some of the to be determined dates have been filled in, so that's great. I guess I would like to see a couple of more of those done. I guess my one question is about item 8. The persons responsible for this item, I have a question about, although extremely capable individuals, Martin Hayward and John Fleming aren't with us now, and so whose name should be in there at this point? Perhaps we could ask staff who's looking after that one.
Well, I think I can answer that for you, Councillor, since it's the city manager and the city planner's positions. It would be Ms. Livingston and Mr. Costafis currently, whose names would be on that.
Okay.
And I will ask the clerk to update that for the next committee cycle.
Good, thank you. And that's all I had to say about our deferred matters list.
Thank you. Mayor Holder.
Yeah, just in response to Councillor Van Holst, the great news is that we have City Manager Lynn Livingston and our great director George Costafis who are dealing with these. And I only say that because as much as we missed and love Martin and John, we've got some very capable staff dealing with this. So I'll leave it there and with our thanks.
Okay, seeing no other comments or questions for this one, we'll call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I'm also a yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. And we will now move to item 2.1, which is an item that I asked to have pulled. I'm going to turn the chair over to Councillor Squire, but I do have Councillor Hillier wishing to speak to this item as well. And then we'll see if this is going to require us to go in camera or not.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to take over. I just wonder, firstly, is there a staff report on this, not a matter that would go in camera? Can anyone indicate? Mr. Kotsifas, do you know that? Or anyone else from staff?
You can hear me? No, there is no additional staff report.
All right. And I just wonder before we get into the debate whether someone's going to be asking for legal advice, we should go in camera before we proceed further, unless someone wants to make some statement in public at this point in time. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's appropriate that we refer this to in camera for discussion.
Mr. Presiding Officer, are you okay with that?
Yes, that's fine. I actually have questions for legal about what happens if this is potentially not accepted. So I think
those are all in camera items in my submission. So is somebody prepared to move that we go in camera? Councillor.
I thought I did.
I'm sorry. You didn't exactly. Oh, the mayor moved it, seconded by Councillor Hillier. And perhaps you could read the reasons, Madam Clerk, before we go in camera.
A matter pertaining to advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with respect to RFP 20-54, Municipal Parking Enforcement Services.
All right, thank you very much. And that's moved and seconded. I wonder if we might vote on that. And I'll start with Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Presiding Officer. Mr.
Yes.
Chair. Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier, thank you, and I'm a yes. So we're now going to go in camera, and we'll just wait a few minutes to do that. Thank you.